This podcast may contain explicit language. Here's looking at you, Torvald. Casablanca versus Rear Window is next. Welcome to the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast, the show that uses a unique rating style to redefine what the greatest movies are. I'm Tom Duncan.
And I'm Dana Duncan.
And tonight for our 325th, and we always promised you on the 25s, we're going to give you something to chew on with some of the really great classic movies. We are once again settling a tie between a couple of films on our master list that are both tied currently inside the top 10 at number 7, and that would be Casablanca and Rear Window. Quickly, let's start with Casablanca here. The cast for this is Michael Curtiz as director, Julius J. Epstein, Philip G. Epstein, and Howard Koch as the writers, Arthur Edison as cinematographer, Max Steiner doing the music, Owen Marks as the editor, Humphrey Bogart as Rick Blaine, Ingrid Bergman as Ilsa Lund, Paul Henreid as Victor Laszlo, Claude Rains as Captain Louis Renault, Conrad Veidt as Major Heinrich Strasser, Sidney Greenstreet as Signor Ferrari, Peter Lorre as Signor Ugarte, Kurt Bois as the pickpocket, Leonid Kinski as Sasha, Madeleine LeBeau as Yvonne, Joy Page as Anina Brandel, S.Z. Sakal as Carl, and Dooley Wilson as Sam. Recognition for the movie: Casablanca was wide released on January 23, 1943. On a budget of roughly $1 million, Casablanca would grossly rough $3.7 million in its initial release. Casablanca was nominated for Best Actor for Humphrey Bogart, Supporting Actor for Claude Rains, Cinematography in Black and White, Film Editing, and Score. It won for Best Picture, Director for Michael Curtiz, and Screenplay for Epstein, and Koch. In 1989, the film was one of the first 25 films selected for preservation in the United States National Film Registry. In 2005, it was named one of the 100 greatest films of the last 80 years by Time magazine. Bright Lights Film Journal stated in 2007 it is one of those rare films from Hollywood's golden age which has managed to transcend its era to entertain generations of moviegoers. Casablanca provides 21st century Americans with an oasis of hope in a desert of arbitrary cruelty and senseless violence. The film also ranked at number 28 on Empire's list of the 100 greatest movies of all time. Screenwriting teacher Robert McKee maintains that the script is, quote, the greatest screenplay of all time. In 2006, the Writers Guild of America agreed, voting it the best ever in its list of the 101 greatest screenplays. Casablanca has been recognized by the AFI on the following lists: 1998, AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies at number 2. In 2001, for AFI's 100 Years, 100 Thrills at number 37. 2002's AFI's 100 Years, 100 Passions as the number 1 film. 2003's AFI's 100 Years, 100 Heroes and Villains, with number 4 being Rick Blaine as a hero. 2004's AFI's 100 Years, 100 Songs, with number 2 As Time Goes By. 2005, AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movie Quotes, with number 5 Here's Looking at You, Kid. Number 20, Louis, I Think This Is the Beginning of a Beautiful Friendship. 28, Play It, Sam, Play As Time Goes By. 32, Round Up the Usual Suspects. 43, Will Always Have Paris. Number 67, of all the gin joints in all the towns in all the world, she walks into mine. These 6 lines were the most of any, with Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz tied for second with 3 apiece. Also nominated for the list was Ilsa, I'm no good at being noble, but it doesn't take much to see that the problems of 3 little people don't amount to a hill of beans in this crazy world. AFI's 2006 list of 100 Years, 100 Cheers at number 32, and 2007 AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition at number 3. It currently holds a 99% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 100 score on Metacritic, and a 4.3 out of 5 on Letterboxd. Quickly, the plot summary for Casablanca is:
in the exotic melting pot of Casablanca during World War II, Rick Blaine, Humphrey Bogart, a jaded and enigmatic American patriot, runs a swanky nightclub that attracts a colorful cast of characters seeking refuge from the chaos of war. When a mysterious and beautiful woman from his past, Ilsa Lund, Ingrid Bergman, walks into his club with her husband, resistance leader Victor Laszlo, Paul Henreid, Rick's life takes an unexpected turn. As the flames of romance reignite, Rick finds himself torn between personal desire and a higher sense of duty, forcing him to navigate a treacherous web of loyalty, love, and sacrifice.
All right. So with that out of the way, we'll discuss Casablanca first before we get to Rear Window. What do you remember about our discussions about this movie previously?
It's difficult. I mean, we did it 3 different times, so they all
That's
kind
correct.
of blend together. I don't know. A lot of times it was you thinking that I was trying to pigeonhole this into the greatest, but I still think it is probably one of the greatest films of all time. And
I don't think it's arguable that it's one of the greatest, but you kept trying to engineer it to be the number 1 film.
yeah, well, okay, whatever.
And for a time, you did actually succeed in that after the revisit. So roughly, this is the most discussed film we've ever had on the show. It is one of only 3 films that we've at least discussed 3 times, the others being Back to the Future and Jaws. But we discussed this originally on January 6th, 2021 for our 50th episode. We covered this for our 117th episode on June 15th, 2022. And then we had a revisit with my sister Allison on August 2nd, 2023. So it is almost 3 years later, pretty much to the date, because it's August 5th today when we're recording, that we last discussed this film. That being said, it has ranked very highly throughout the multiple different scores that we've had. It originally had 53 in our first episode. We bumped that up to a 56.43. It moved down slightly to the current place that it holds in a 54.75. There are only 7 films, I think approximately, that currently outrank it. Yes, 7 films exactly. So they're actually tied at number 8. I apologize. I got that wrong in the original spiel at the top. That Rear Window and Casablanca are tied at number 8 and round out, for the most part, our top 10. But there are 7 films ahead of it that have 55 or more points, meaning that they have at least 90% of the possible points that we could have. The closest that anybody has come to a true perfect score is Jaws currently at 57.9, which we thought would be nearly impossible by the way that we have done this list. That any film would achieve that many 10s and 9s and 9.5s for that matter consecutively. Now, this is one of the movies, though, that we've discussed the most often because while it is near the top, it is a movie that we personally love and have a certain affection for. I don't think that will be unusual for anyone that has listened to this show, and frankly, most of these Casablanca episodes have been very popular over the years. So us returning to it now feels a little bit fitting, particularly given that it is another one of those big numbers, 325. And we're discussing it in the context of the most often discussed director on the show, and that would be Alfred Hitchcock.
Yes. I know. I mean, this is kind of like Sophie's Choice.
Maybe for you. I know that you personally, and frankly, we were supposed to have my mother on as a guest. She's having some technical difficulties tonight, so she couldn't join us, and we're as disappointed. Maybe not as much as she is, but we're still disappointed. I know that she really wanted to discuss it because the last time that she was supposed to be on for Rear Window, the original episode, she also had technical difficulties that prevented us from having her that evening as well. So, all that is to be said, we will now jump to our second movie of the evening. That would be Rear Window. As I mentioned a few minutes ago, Alfred Hitchcock is the director, written by John Michael Hayes, cinematography by Robert Burks, music by Franz Waxman, who is a GMOAT Hall of Famer, as well as this next person, editing by George Tomasini, starring GMOAT Hall of Famer James Stewart, Grace Kelly as Lisa Fremont, Wendell Corey as New York Police Detective Lieutenant Thomas Tom J. Doyle, Thelma Ritter as Stella, Raymond Burr as Lars Thorwald, Judith Evelyn as Miss Lonelyhearts, Ross Bagdasarian as the songwriter, Georgine Darcy as Miss Torso, Sarah Berner and Frank Cady as the couple living above the Thorwalds. Great character names, of course. Recognition for Rear Window. Rear Window was released on August 4th, 1954. It garnered widespread critical acclaim, even ranking 5th on Cahiers du Cinema's Top 10 Films of the Year list in 1955. On a budget of roughly $1 million, the film would go on to gross $37 million over its total box office run and earning the number 4 spot on the 1954 box office. Rear Window would receive 4 Oscar nominations for Best Director for Hitchcock, Adapted Screenplay for Hayes, Cinematography in Color, and Sound Recording. In 1998, Time Out magazine conducted a poll, and Rear Window was voted the 21st greatest film of all time. In 2022, Time Out magazine ranked the film at number 26 on their list of the 100 best thriller films of all time. In the British Film Institute's 2012 Sight and Sound polls of the greatest films ever made, Rear Window was ranked 53rd among critics and 48th among directors. In the 2022 edition of the magazine's greatest films of all time list, the film ranked 38th in the critics' poll. In 2017, Empire magazine's readers' poll ranked Rear Window at number 72 on its list of the 100 greatest movies. It has been recognized by the AFI on the following lists: at number 42 in AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies, at number 14 in AFI's 100 Years, 100 Thrills, at number 48 in AFI's 100 Years, 100 Movies 10th Anniversary Edition, and at number 3 in AFI's 10 Top 10 in the mystery genre. Rear Window currently holds a 99% among critics on Rotten Tomatoes, a 100 score on Metacritic, and a 4.4 out of 5 on Letterboxd. And the plot summary for Rear Window is:
in Rear Window, we find ourselves confined within the claustrophobic confines of a Greenwich Village apartment, peering through the lens of LB Jefferies, James Stewart, a wheelchair-bound photographer. His summer pastime is a voyeuristic venture into the lives of his neighbors, a cross-section of urban archetypes played out in the building's courtyard. Each window frames a fragment of humanity, from the lonely Miss Lonelyhearts to the tantalizing Ms. Torso. The plot pivots on Jeff's suspicion that a neighbor, Lars Thorwald, Raymond Burr, has murdered his wife. The suspicion, shared and fueled by his glamorous girlfriend, Lisa, Grace Kelly, and his nurse, Stella, Thelma Ritter, drives the narrative forward. Hitchcock masterfully crafts tension not through action, but through the act of watching, turning the audience into voyeurs, complicit in Jeff's obsessions.
Thank you. The total score for this one as well is a 54.75, as we had currently for Casablanca, thus why they are tied on the list at number 8. So, turning our attention to Rear Window, this is a personal favorite of yours. We have not yet described, again, I guess, we could go through as we normally do our relationships to this, and maybe that's a good place to start for our conversation for the evening. Casablanca, to me, and Rear Window are movies that I have seen so often, so much during my life, that it is hard to remember the first time that I saw them, because I've just been watching them so much.
Well, for me, I can tell you the first time I saw Rear Window, because Hitchcock owned Rear Window, and he put a designation in his will that it could not be reshown until I think it was 10 years after he died. So I think the first time it was shown again was 1985. It had not been shown or anything for 20 or 30 years by that point. I think I happened to find it on video, VHS, probably in the early 90s when it was finally released. It made a tour through the cinemas for live release or theater release. So somewhere in there is the first time I saw it. Casablanca I've seen so many times because it would have been available. I can't tell you the first time. It probably would have been in high school that I saw it, but I can't tell you. I've seen it probably 50 or 60 times.
So since we don't have my mother to round us out on relationships to the movie and such, do you recall ever having a conversation with your dad about either of these films?
My dad happened to see Rear Window in theaters in 54. Because he mentioned that there was this film that was out there. I think when it became available on video, I had mentioned it to him, and he had said that he had really thought this was something really great when he saw it. Casablanca, it was released he was born in June of 40, so he wouldn't have been in theaters. Whether it was released on Movie of the Week or what, I don't. So I don't have a memory about him talking about Rear Window. But my dad liked Hitchcock, but there just wasn't that many Hitchcock films available when I was a kid.
And I think that's hard to, I guess, grasp or understand in the modern film or cinema economy, given that streaming has given us access to just about everything through the history of film.
Well, and there was no such thing as a Turner Classic or an AMC or an HBO. I mean, you just didn't have it. The best you got was...
HBO has been around since the 70s, so when you were talking about watching these films, HBO did exist.
I'm talking about the early 70s. HBO, I think, went on the air in 74 or 75, and it was on cable only, and it was on a very few number of stations. It didn't become a big deal until the early 80s. About 78, 79, it became significant, but it wasn't until the early 80s that it became the dominant force that it was. So you only saw these old films. Either it was the Late Show, which was usually the B films that were not very good, or films that nobody cared about, or if it was a big film, the networks would show them because each of the networks had a film of the week that they put on. I want to say ABC was Tuesday nights, and I think it was an NBC that was Sunday night. I don't remember. Each one of the three networks had their own night that they did a major film. And that's how you saw them. Otherwise, you didn't once they were out of theaters.
Well, thank you for proving exactly my point that I was trying to say, and then extending it well beyond what I had mentioned before, only to further prove that, yes, things didn't used to be like they are now.
Yeah, okay, fine, whatever. Should we go back in time when children had respect for their parents?
I mean, would that really make this show any fun?
Okay.
All right. I'm going to ask this, and you may not have an answer for it. Why are these two... I mean, we went through it before. 99% for each on Rotten Tomatoes. 100 score on Metacritic for both. One has a 4.4 and the other has a 4.3. Those are the general audience scores for all of this. They're within marginal points of each other. It seems like there are very few lists or rankings that separate these two, unless apparently it's the Sight and Sound poll, which doesn't even rank Casablanca. I don't get that one. But just further putting yet another nail in the Sight and Sound's coffin for why we don't think it should be one of the great cinema film lists ever.
Yeah.
But
yes, but Jean Dielman is on. Yeah, okay. Is number one. Okay, whatever.
that aside, that's not French, it's Belgian.
Okay, whatever. Continue.
But why are these two enduring classics?
there are certain times that something is done where it is so good that it transcends multiple people's tastes, where it speaks to whole groups of people. There are certain pieces of art. There are certain pieces of music. There's a reason why certain songs become like classics and like everybody knows them and likes them. It's the same way with this. These two films are not anything alike, but they still have brilliant acting performances, brilliant writing, brilliant cinematography. There's just so much about both of them that are just almost perfect. There's nothing not to like about them. And so if you're a lover of cinema, you know, it takes sometimes a true baseball fan to appreciate a no-hitter or a pitching duel where it's a 1-0 win. Same way with movies. Sometimes it isn't necessarily the movie, but the collective together that makes it so great.
I would argue these two films are very simple in concept and premise, and they speak to larger universal themes of how we would like to perceive ourselves and how we make our way through the world, and are expertly made on a technical side. And so from a critical standpoint, the analytics would say, because they are well made and they fit all of these, they tick all the boxes, let's say, they're going to be critic favorites. And because they're simple, easy to understand, have emotional characteristics that appeal to people, and have simple stories that they can understand, it translates to large swaths of the public that aren't necessarily the film critics and cinephiles and such. If you're just simply looking at each of those, I would say that's maybe an analytical reason for it, but it might just simply be they're really good movies.
Yeah. I could watch either of them on a monthly basis without being bored.
One of these I favor much more than the other. I think that one of these gives me a certain feeling and stirs inside me something that the other does not. I think that it switched for me about the last 5 years, because the first time that I watched one of them, or at least the first several times, I enjoyed the film, but it didn't quite have that emotional, affecting nature to it. And the more I seem to watch that film, the more it seems to enchant a certain core fundamental value inside of me about several things. Whereas the other movie I've found to be, well, and I hate to put it this way, I've found to be getting more boring as time goes on. Like, I find it less and less enjoyable. I don't know why.
Okay.
And that's going to make me a little of an outlier on this show, because I know you love both of these equally. But yeah, I don't know where to take it from there. Quickly, let's move into this. What do you think Casablanca is about?
It is about romance gone awry, but more than anything, it is about understanding that you are but a potential small cog in a bigger machine. This is about Rick being altruistic, magnanimous, and understanding that his feelings, his animosity is meaningless in the context of world conflagration.
Boy, you use your words prettier than a $50 whore.
Thank you.
I definitely think that Rick is very much a metaphor for the movie as a whole. The movie can be understood simply or it can be understood more deeply. And the more you watch it, I think that you can see the metaphor much more clearly, where Rick is the stand-in as the American for being drawn into war and being drawn back into a cause for the fight for true freedom overall, where he's been kind of woken up by the end of the film to recognize that he has a place in this fight and he needs to be invited back. I mean, it's explicitly stated at the end of the movie by Paul Henreid's character, Victor Laszlo, welcome back to the fight. And I can't unsee that as part of the overall how the characters interact with each other. You have a Russian that works in his club. You have I think a Czechoslovakian who also works in his club. He's helping Bulgarians escape. He's helping a Scandinavian woman and a Polish man, or excuse me, is he Czechoslovakian? I don't even remember where. But basically, you have all these different countries that are being helped.
Laszlo's Czech.
Including Renault, who is a Frenchman, and he is being drawn back into the conflict to help all these various different places and locations from Major Strasser, the German and the Nazi part of the SS. It's rather explicitly there, whether you want to see it or not.
Well, here's a little tidbit for you if you didn't know. Who was the first non-studio personnel to see Casablanca? Franklin Roosevelt. They gave him a copy to watch on the ship going to Casablanca for his conference with Churchill.
Okay.
It had not been released in theaters yet.
It was premiered in December of 42, so it technically was released that year, but it was not wide released until January because of that event, yes. It was held back to coincide with him going over there and world events and mirroring some of that. You and I were on an episode of the Revisionist Almanac discussing 1942, and given all the propagandist films that were around during that year and how much we complained on that episode about them, this feels like another one of those, but it somehow is this weird amalgamous happy accident, because it takes a bunch of songs, it takes a bunch of random script pieces and forms them all together and somehow comes out with this absolutely brilliant Frankenstein. It's an exceptional accident of cinema that this thing even exists or is anywhere near as good as it is, because the film wouldn't be anywhere on top of its legendary or titan status without the ending, and the ending was an even bigger accident than the rest of the movie.
There were 3 endings filmed or written, and they shot the first one and they said, nope, this is it. We're just going to release this. But I mean, for that matter, there's been a big trope. Jack Benny is in the cafe sitting at one of the tables because he had originally been thought about for different parts in this film or something. And Jack Warner said, well, Jack, if you really want to, you can be an extra in the film. So he's sitting at a table, and I can tell you about where it is. It's when they're having the drinks at the table. You can see the background of the people. You can see Jack Benny sitting in the back corner. I mean, it's just kind of like they kind of just threw it together and never thought they had anything with this. It was just kind of, eh.
And watching a lot of film from that era, that very much sounds the way things had to be done. There were very few directors with that level of intentionality, and certainly Michael Curtiz was not known as like one of the great masters. And yet, by far, he comes up with one of these just absolutely random strokes of genius and art. Whereas on the other side, with Rear Window and Alfred Hitchcock, there is so much intentionality. There is so much micromanaging of the entire process of the filmmaking.
Yeah.
That it is in no degree any sort of accident, but rather the work of an intentional master working with other intentional masters. We have at least 4 GMOAT Hall of Famers in this film. We've only discussed it once, But we have the editor, the musician. I think we might have even had at one time, or at least I've looked up, the cinematographer for inclusion, Alfred Hitchcock himself, and James Stewart. When you have that many good people working together, it is no happy accident.
We got to be pretty close for Grace Kelly, don't we?
No.
We've done two. We need 4 or 3?
5.
5. Oh, To Catch a Thief and Sabrina.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember what
Excuse
other
me, we've
films
done
she
3
did.
for her. I forgot that she did High Noon.
Yes.
By the way, this might be the wrong time to bring it up, but I do have an actress nominee.
Who?
Do you want to do this now? We'll do the...
We got a little extra time given that we don't have
All right.
Mom here.
So let's skip around a little bit, and we'll take a temporary pause because, and this is ironic, I already mentioned that George Tomasini was in the GMOAT Hall of Fame. I forgot to mention that I haven't nominated him yet, but he's done such films as, and this is going to be in the category of editor, The Birds, Psycho, North by Northwest, Vertigo, The Man Who Knew Too Much, Rear Window, and Stalag 17.
Okay.
Okay. Now, this is the more important one for you. This actress has been the lead in at least 5 movies that we've covered. Well, I take that back. She's been a secondary character in 2 of the ones that we did, but her career spans 50 years at this point. Alien, Aliens, Wall-E, Avatar, and Ghostbusters, Sigourney Weaver.
Wow. Yeah. Okay. We haven't done... Yeah. Okay. Yes. All right. Yeah.
I figured. I don't know why that occurred to me around the time that we did Aliens a few weeks ago, but yeah. So she will be our first actress inclusion. So you can finally stop worrying about that you've rejected. Carrie Fisher. All right. But before we get too much further, let's take a quick break and we'll be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, next week for our 326th episode, we discuss Notorious from 1946, celebrating its 80th anniversary. Directed by Alfred Hitchcock, written by Ben Hecht, cinematography by Ted Tetzlaff, music by Roy Webb, edited by Theron Worth, starring Cary Grant, Ingrid Bergman, and Claude Rains. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD.
One of my favorites.
Never seen it.
Great. Claude Rains alone is worth the price of admission.
I think that's going to be the 3rd different film for Claude Rains. He did Mr. Smith, obviously Casablanca, and then that one. I can't think of too many other ones that he's been in that we would have discussed, but that would be a nice addition to the overall GMOAT list at some point. Let's see here. Now Voyager, which we visited in the 1942 movie, but we didn't get overall. The Adventures of Robin Hood has a possibility that we'd get to it at some point. Just trying to look what else might even be available here.
The Invisible Man.
I suppose. Oh, I forgot he was in Lawrence of Arabia. So we'll definitely cover that. It's possible yet.
King's Row.
Yeah, we're probably not going to cover that one, though. Anyway, because we're without a guest, we'll just move right into it. And for tonight, since we are breaking our tie, if you were not here a few months ago when we last broke a tie, we're just going to kind of go through each of the categories, and we're going to talk about each movie as it relates to that category. Which one is better? Given that these are tied, you think we'll probably be splitting hairs, but let's start with legacy. The legacy of the film, approximately 5 years after it came out to today. For Casablanca, that's 1947 to now. And for Rear Window, that's roughly 1959 to now. What is the legacy of these two films as stacked and compared against each other?
Did you say 59?
Yeah, 1954, 5 years, 1959.
Okay. All right. Sorry, I misunderstood what you said.
That's why I do the math around here.
It's not what I was alluding to, but never mind.
Okay. Anyway, which of these two do you have as the greater legacy score? And before you answer that, just for some context, Rear Window was given a 9.17 in the only episode that we discussed it on. And Casablanca was given scores of 9.75, 9.88, and 9.35. So in each of the episodes that we did, it was higher than Rear Window.
Yeah, and it's higher. It is definitely higher. I mean, the fact that sixth...
Which one? I pick a film.
Casablanca is higher.
Okay.
Six of the lines are absolutely in ultimate memory. It cemented Bogart as a leading man and kind of really got him going. If not, I think the only reason that, especially after next week when we watch Notorious, that Ingrid Bergman's career did not continue on is simply because of her affair with Roberto Rossellini, where Isabella was conceived. She would have had a huge career in Hollywood, but she was ostracized. So I think it has the greater impact overall. I think Rear Window is taken aback a little bit by the fact that it was not made readily available for television and for network movies for decades.
Let me play a little bit of devil's advocate here, because you're talking about that Rear Window has been widely available in either VHS, DVD, or whatever for about 40 years at this point. And when we did our internal office poll, the hands that went up were roughly similar, but I think I saw a few more for Casablanca. What I will say, we normally divide this category, for anybody who's normally listening to the show, between industry and audience. I think if you ask the wider industry, Rear Window is considered the greater film because of the technical expertise and the intentionality of a great master making one of his best films. If you ask the general director, technician, actor, what are Hitchcock's 5 greatest films, Rear Window is almost certainly going to be on it. And I think that's why it's included among the Sight and Sound poll, but not necessarily that Casablanca is included on that. Because the Sight and Sound poll is made up of, I want to say at this point, like 18,000 different critics and other people that are submitting lists and various things for that particular ranking. They're from all over the world. I think Casablanca is a bigger movie to Americans than it is internationally. And that's the only thing that holds me back from placing it above. Like, again, we're splitting hairs. To me, if it were just me subjectively saying, I think Casablanca is the greater movie, but I think there's at least some arguments to put Rear Window ahead of it.
I understand your points, but I just... It is a very fine line, but I still think Casablanca is going to win that category.
I played the devil's advocate. I made the points. Ultimately, subjectively, I agree with you, but I think at least it needed some consideration. All right, so on the first category here, we're going to have Casablanca 1 and Rear Window number 2. Now, in impact and significance, this is normally a similar measurement. Industry and audience, split the category, but we're usually adjusting to the 5 years in which it came out or shortly thereafter. So 1942, 1943 to 47, 48. and 54 to 59, what is the higher level of impact and significance? This one is a much closer race, in my opinion, than Legacy, because both were financially successful. One film got a lot of critical praise, would win Best Picture, although, to be fair, it was before they had a lot of international influence, so it was a very Americanized award. The other is one of the rare circumstances that Alfred Hitchcock was actually nominated for Best Director, and it garnered at least several nominations, which was unusual for Hitchcock because he was seen as being a much more popular director and therefore not worthy of the Academy's standards.
Yes.
But if you're talking about star quality and such, what Maltese Falcon did for Bogart, Casablanca kicked the door down for him being that generation's star. You said Ingrid Bergman. Ingrid Bergman, within 5 years, I think wins at least one, if not both of her Oscars. I might have that right. I know Gaslight is within the 5 years, but I don't recall what the other, was it for The Bells of St. Mary's?
I think so.
So then I think that is, yeah, I think she wins back-to-back, if I recall right. Oscars within 5 years after this movie. Michael Curtiz, he doesn't go on to do anything major, but, like, he's there. Claude Rains had already established himself as a star, whereas Rear Window, you have the very brief career of Grace Kelly leading into what her final movie would be, which was with Alfred Hitchcock. James Stewart is already James Stewart by this point, but he is that exceeding leading man. Hitchcock puts himself at the front end of what is to be one of the great directorial runs of all time, from roughly Rear Window and Dial M for Murder through The Birds in 63, roughly a 9-year, 10-year window for him.
You can go 1 year earlier with Strangers on a Train.
Strangers on a Train is 51.
I thought it was 50. It's a couple years. I thought it was 52.
No, it's 51. But even so, not to say that Hitchcock hadn't made good movies to that point, but I think if you're talking about where he's at his peak, the run from Rear Window to The Birds, with the exception of The Trouble with Harry, are some of his most famous and notable films. Rear Window, Dial M for Murder, To Catch a Thief, The Man Who Knew Too Much, Vertigo, North by Northwest, Psycho, The Birds. I mean, it's a murderer's row of his best films, pretty much all significantly right back to back to back. So you have to consider that Rear Window, Dial M is being made at the exact same time. To Catch a Thief is coming out very shortly. He's got Vertigo, which at least at one point is number one on the Sight and Sound poll and has been in the top 5 a couple of times. And then what we have is the number one Hitchcock film on the list in North by Northwest, all within that 5-year period. So there's a lot to consider and unpack in here. If I were to maybe... Boy, it's so splitting hairs.
I have Rear Window.
I thought about it.
I have to do it because of just the sheer fact of Hitchcock and the run.
The financial success and viability and the popular success of that thereof probably puts it a little bit higher, because even international critics loved this movie in a way that the Oscars never really captured for.
Yeah. And when you look at Casablanca, okay, Bogart's next film was To Have or Have Not, which was 54, or was 44.
I think it's got to be a Rear Window. Casablanca was made for $1 million, and it makes 3.7. It wins the Oscar. It establishes Bogart as the star. But Hitchcock's run that we went through, James Stewart's continuing success through that decade, is all predicated on Rear Window being made for $1 million and making 37.
Yeah. And of that a large portion of that was building that incredible stage. I mean, that was an actual courtyard.
Okay. We move to novelty. Novelty is usually a measurement of anything original about the film and then the execution on that. And that's normally where our split has been. I find these both to be exceptionally well-made movies that are highly executed, and I don't know if I can really differentiate between the two on either side, with the exception of probably the set design. But because Rick's Cafe Americain is so iconic, it's really hard to even give Rear Window much of a credit up on that. Where I would say it has to be differentiated, though, is in the originality. We had a lot of propaganda-adjacent films from this era, all trying to talk about America's entrance back into the world stage and into the war and supporting this notion of what America could be. This is just the finest version of it and means so much more than just that. But you're talking about a movie in Rear Window that, as far as a premise and a concept, is so unusually smart yet simple that it feels unicorn-like. And I know that Hitchcock, I believe, was borrowing from some other international films, and he was borrowing some tropes. But if you're asking me the more audacious film for its time, Casablanca feels much like it was mirroring public sentiment. Rear Window was showing the underbelly of society that they were ready to apparently see in droves, but may not have been willing to discuss outside of the theater. So I have Rear Window 1 here, and I have Casablanca 2.
I have Rear Window 1 and Casablanca 2, and this is why. Hitchcock predicted reality TV and the whole concept of voyeurism in entertainment. First time I ever saw it.
Okay, well, let's pump the brakes here. You said you watched that in the early 90s, and you saw MTV before you saw Rear Window.
True.
So in the order of the timeline of things, you did see reality television before that. What you mean to say is that this is the first version of it that came historically.
Yes. It kind of predicted where things were going from the culture in the 50s. And
I think that's fairly true given the celebrity worship culture that we'd already developed in the 20s and 30s and then continued on forth. I know Hitchcock didn't do a lot of movies in New York, but you don't really have to look very far away from celebrity culture of the 50s to think of Joe DiMaggio and Marilyn Monroe, for example, and the mobs of people constantly following them, or Sinatra and his fan club all over the place. I think there was a bit of a celebrity culture. It wasn't quite to the tabloid level that we eventually got to in the 80s and 90s. But yeah, there are definitely seeds there. I think it might be a little bit too much to say that he predicted. I think he understood a universal theme that was present that other people hadn't wanted or been willing to talk about before. And that might be the difference. So we both have Rear Window 1. We have Casablanca 2 on novelty. I will admit, I did not fill out in advance any of my feelings on this until I basically opened my mouth. I did not make up my mind. So I am doing these completely on the fly because I'm not sure where I was going to come down. But that looks like a good spot for our second break. We'll take a quick break and be right back. Before we jump back into the episode, and before we get to the Stanley rubric in a minute, if you're ever curious about our Master Greatest Movies of All Time list that has every graded movie we've ever discussed on the show, there's a link in the episode description of every episode of this show, or you can go to RonnieDuncanStudios.com and find it as the top entry on the Greatest Movie of All Time podcast show page. That has the grades we've done so far for all 292 movies we've graded, and we continue to add more each week. Make sure to check that out as we go and follow along. Dad, do we have anyone to remember this week?
Yes. Vincent Pastore, 80, American actor, The Sopranos, Gotti, Shark Tale. Scott Hylands, 83, Canadian actor. Night Heat, Daddy's Gone Huntin', The Boys in Company C. And Arlene Smith, 84, American singer, The Chantels.
So forgiveness to Mr. Hylands and Miss Smith. I don't know them for either of their work. I apologize for that. However, Vincent Pastore is, as a part of The Sopranos, somebody that I know quite well, even though his arc in the show was minimal compared to some of the primary characters. He has quite a notable arc, but it is only the first 2 seasons. I don't think he's a huge part of the first season. He ends up becoming a significant part of the second season. And then, spoiler alert, but his demise at the end of season 2 is obviously one of the darker and more troubling things that you get to, but also makes sense from a story arc perspective. He is a fond and fan favorite character, and I guess it's hard to imagine now that several of those actors have passed away at this point. The actor who played Paulie Walnuts passed a few years ago, I think, that we covered on the show. Obviously, James Gandolfini passed away very early for what his age was. And we still have Edie Falco. We still have Stevie Van Zandt. But for a show that's been off the air for almost 20 years at this point, it's hard to think of that these people who lived with us for however long, and now because they've been in streaming and we've had HBO and HBO Go, HBO Max, that these characters or these actors aren't around with us anymore because they were just so a part of our TV going, and especially if you've rewatched The Sopranos multiple times like I have, I know most people that were fans of the show have at this point, it's just hard to think or fathom them not being with us, and yet you still in the back of your mind know that they're not. And so we fondly remember these here for their contributions with a moment of silence in their honor. Thank you. We left off at classicness. This is normally a ranking system that is based on how well something has aged or not. Given that these are 2 of the enduring classics of all time, and we mentioned that at the top of the episode, I would find it very difficult to separate out or shift between these 2. So let's go to our original scores. Casablanca on 3 episodes ranked at a 9, a 9.25, a 10, and a 10. Rear Window was a 9.67. Not a whole lot of separation. So what do you have as your number 1 here? You usually lead classicness.
I have Casablanca, and it's just the concept, maybe it's become more poignant of the voyeurism of staring at your neighbors. I understand the concept of what's going on, but
all right, let me at least make the alternative argument, even though I'm arguing against my own opinion. Personally, I think Casablanca is the more classic of the 2 films, because I think it is, especially for Americans, a way we like to view ourselves, in that we feel very altruistic, that we're willing to sacrifice for the greater good, that ultimately we're on the side of right, and that we do the things that are necessary, sometimes even though they're not necessarily the best or the most wholesome, but in the end, we end up being correct. And so it's this narrative and this myth we've kind of convinced of ourselves. I would also argue that Rear Window and peering around at your neighbors doesn't feel quite the same way. Like, I think we made this argument when we were talking about it originally in the first episode, that staring out your window just doesn't seem to be something that happens unless you're a boomer these days. But what we turned that on, or the alternative of where we're viewing our neighbors, is through social media, as we put more and more out there for people to view. But it's very selective what we let people watch. And this movie is very much about the unvarnished portions of ourselves. So I think there is a little bit of a change in that. And I know I said I would make the case for Rear Window, and I've been doing the opposite up to this point. You could say that because of the social media aspect, that this movie would take place differently or would be made differently. Somebody trying to solve a murder through somebody's posts, through their Instagram or their TikTok videos or something else, that's how this movie would be made nowadays. That you could at least see how that movie translates, whereas a movie about World War II and the greater good and fighting good versus evil, particularly Nazism, you would think, you would hope, is a relic of the past. I'm still not making a good case. I guess I'm just stuck at no. It's Casablanca 1. I think if I would have predicted early on, I think I would have said Rear Window 1 as opposed to Casablanca. But the more we talked about it, I think I've talked myself into it even, where I don't think it's particularly close. All right. Finally, at least for our purposes, the last category that we get to decide on, rewatchability. To me, it's not close. I don't know why. I keep finding Rear Window to be more and more predictable and boring as years have gone by. And so for me, I've started to connect emotionally much more with Casablanca over the last 5 years than I did before that. I can't put a finger on it exactly as to why. But as a result, for me, Casablanca's 1, Rear Window's 2. Do you agree or disagree? And not necessarily that you have to agree with my opinion, but rather just the order.
Boy, see, this one was the hardest category for me because I could watch either of them.
I know. I always knew this category was going to be tougher for you, which is why I started it and tried to put my baseline out there. So if you really felt strongly that you wanted to argue for the other one and we had to kind of fight about it, you had that opportunity, or you could just go with me.
Boy,
here's the thing. The entire ranking and who wins the tiebreaker comes down to this. Each category each movie has 2 categories thus far. We already know, you and I, who wins the audience rankings. So depending on which one you pick here...
I had written down, to be honest, Casablanca 1 and Rear Window 2 with a question mark. And I was going to potentially shift based on whatever Mom had said. But since she's not here, I'm kind of stuck. So I guess that's where I'll go.
You have Casablanca 1 and Rear Window 2.
Yeah.
Any particular reason why?
Casablanca, because it's so ultimately classic. Okay, and Rear Window is in large part based upon the murder. And since you know what the murder or who and what took place, it kind of loses its oomph. and it does a little bit more each time you watch it.
For audience score, now that we have to substitute the IMDb scores, first let's go to how it has played out over the years. Casablanca originally had a 9.5 audience score based on its 95% Rotten Tomatoes score. It has not deviated from that at all since season 1. However, when we added in the 86% for Google users, it dropped down to a 9.05. And then the most recent audience score had it at an 83% for Google users. I don't know what they're watching. And it added an 8.9. That being said, the IMDb users are just as low and have it at an 8.5. So Casablanca finishes at a 9. For Rear Window, though, we went from a 90 Google score and a 95 Rotten Tomatoes score to an 8.4 IMDb score and a 95 Rotten Tomatoes score, giving it an 8.95, so separated by 5/100ths of a point, and meaning that Casablanca places first in 4 categories and Rear Window in 2. And thus, drumroll please, Casablanca wins the tiebreaker.
Yep. This is about as thin as a piece of paper.
So that means Casablanca is number 8, Rear Window is number 9, and we're going to have to live with that.
And if you were to talk to Sir Alfred, if he would find out that one of his films was that close to Casablanca, I think he'd be proud.
So obviously there are no remaining questions for either film, and like all of the other stuffing and cilantro we put on most of our discussions for these movies, if you want any of our Casablanca conversations, our entire back catalog is available to you. You just basically need to go into the show page on Spotify or Apple or whatever and search Casablanca, and you can find the other 3 times we discussed it. And I'm sure at some point we'll probably revisit Rear Window, thus making this tiebreaker completely futile, useless, flaccid.
Yeah.
But that being said, I'm sure we're going to try for a 3rd time to have my mother on to discuss that and hope that she doesn't have technical difficulties. Maybe one of these times. But all things told, we'll just jump right into final thoughts for the week.
Well, and a little bit of taken aback because when we're filming or recording this, tomorrow happens to be our 38th anniversary, so I feel a little bad. I will be stopping off at the convenience store for a couple of pints of Ben & Jerry's to take home and share. Because, of course, nothing says togetherness more than...
I want to get fat with you?
Well, ice cream from a couple of flaming liberals.
Yeah, sure.
Nice.
Otherwise, First Watch Rewatch did choose its 3rd season, and what we're going to do for those of you that are not in our Discord community as Cinema Legacy poll participants, we did decide to go with Dexter. So that will be coming up.
First season?
First season. She has not seen it before. I told her at least the first season is a bit puzzle box-like, which is something that Sarah really enjoys. I'm excited to go back to it for the first time in several years. You never finished that first season. And I know you said on last week's episode that you saw a couple of episodes of The Trinity Killer. I think you saw a couple of scenes that I was watching, but I don't know if you saw a couple of episodes of that. But either way, it's something to go back to, and I'm hoping that since this is a show that more people have seen, such as our guest last week in Kieran, that we might have some other guest personalities come onto the show to discuss that with us. But we'll see what we might have in store. We do have this next week off from that show, and then we'll be starting that up because we normally take a gap week in between, especially with school starting up and things going on for my co-host. I wanted to give her a little bit of space to, make stuff work in her life, especially given, well, I won't reveal that there's a problem with her living situation at the moment that involves a water main. And that's all I'll say.
Oh.
Yeah. But
Okay.
that being said, we have coming up in the next few weeks Notorious. And then we have La La Land, Arrival, and Training Day Revisited. So we have some interesting stuff still coming up here. We get to A Streetcar Named Desire in early September, Zoolander, and That Thing You Do before the last of my 3 favorite films that we have yet to discuss on the show, The Departed, which will be the 20th anniversary for that.
The feeling in my forearm might be back by then.
Yeah, you might have to reveal the reason why, but...
I figured I would.
But regardless, that looks like a good stopping point for this week. Thank you for listening. I do wish we could chat longer, but I'm having an old friend for dinner. Next week, for our 326th episode, we discuss Notorious from 1946, celebrating its 70th anniversary. Directed by Alfred Hitchcock, written by Ben Hecht, cinematography by Ted Tetzlaff, music by Roy Webb, edited by Theron Worth, starring Cary Grant, Ingrid Bergman, and Claude Rains. You won't want to miss that one, so watch ahead of the show by searching the Real Good app to find where it's streaming for you. That's REELGOOD. Please like, follow, rate, and review, or whatever on whichever platform you have so that more can join in our fun. You can also email the show at RonnieDuncanStudios.com or greatestaltimemoviepodcast@gmail.com, or find us on YouTube, Instagram, Twitter, Letterboxd, Blue Sky, Threads, or TikTok at the handle at GMOAT Podcast. The Greatest Movie of All Time is a production of Ronnie Duncan Studios. Our show is mixed, edited, and written by Thomas Duncan. Our music is thanks to Purple Planet Music. Our distributor is Captivate FM. Our technical provider is Riverside FM.